Hello everyone and welcome to this behind the scenes video showing the creation of my entry into the Ludum Dare 37 combo. So those of you who don't know, Ludum Dare is a game development competition where you get 48 hours to create a game from scratch using only self-made assets. Some people choose to work in teams, they participate in the jam where you get an extra 24 hours. However, I worked on this game alone, so I submitted it to the combo. I started working as soon as I woke up. The theme had been announced while I was sleeping, and so I was excited to find out what I would spend the next 2 days on. The theme was one room. I began by sketching out some ideas on the whiteboard. My first idea, Alright, my girlfriend's idea was to make a game where the player would fall through a huge pipe and the goal was to avoid obstacles along the way. However, I thought that the core gameplay was too similar to previous projects of mine. Also got the idea of creating a programmer simulator where a guy would build a programming career sitting on the computer in his bedroom, kind of like Game Dev Tycoon. This idea had a lot of potential for throwing in some fun jokes and references, but I thought it would be too complex to get some actual gameplay going. Finally, I came up with the idea of doing a traditional Defend the Castle game. The main character, Bob the Maniac, is an introvert who's tired of people bothering him all the time. So he decides to wipe out the human race all without ever leaving the comfort of his room. With this idea in mind, it was time to boot up Unity. I quickly got some enemies walking across the screen. I also did a first pass of the shooting mechanic. It's not pretty, but it worked. Next up was spawning enemies. At first I used the same technique as in my wave spawner tutorial, but I found that this way I would have to spend way too much time creating and balancing each individual wave. Instead I opted to create a pool of enemy types, each with a wave start that determines the number of waves before the enemy type starts spawning, and with a weight that allowed me to make some enemies spawn more frequently than others. Of course I had to come up with a few algorithms to adjust the amount of enemies and the spawn rate so that the difficulty of each wave would increase as the player progressed, but not doing all this by hand saved a huge amount of time, and also made it much easier to adjust difficulty by simply changing some numbers in the algorithm. Now that the core mechanics were in place, it was time to begin working on graphics, so I quickly threw together something in Photoshop. As the main enemy, I created a stick figure and exported every limb as a separate sprite. This allowed me to quickly create simple animations inside of Unity without having to deal with large sprite sheets. Oh, and game development is exhausting, so remember to eat once in a while. At this point it was all about creating more content for the game. I programmed a weapon manager that allowed me to swap different weapons in and out. At first I made a pistol, an Uzi, a rifle and a sniper, but later I added a bazooka and even a nuke using the same system. I made some particle effects to make each hit more impactful and even added in some camera shake. For the enemies, I made a Humvee, a tank, and a huge stickman who's a pain to deal with. And that was pretty much it for day 1. For day 2 I began by redoing the environment. A long shower made me realize that some cuter graphics would make the whole thing more enjoyable. I also added a custom cursor that would flash red on successful hits. It's always a good idea to give the player visual feedback on how he's doing. To give the player a sense of progression, I added an item shop where you can buy weapons, health upgrades, and even unlock turrets and missile launchers that will automatically kill off incoming enemies. As a currency, I chose to use insanity because I thought it helped tie the gameplay together with the story. And talking about story, I needed a good way to display the backstory I'd created. For this I made a separate scene that would load before the main level. To avoid just displaying a big chunk of text, I made the letters animate in one after the other. I think the final result worked pretty well. Of course, make sure to always add a way to skip stuff like this. With only a few hours left before the deadline, I realized it wouldn't be wise to spend time on a menu, so I jumped right into the audio part. I chose to not include music in the game. However, this was not so much a design decision as it was a way to save some extra time. I still had to create a lot of different sounds though. I recorded everything through my microphone, did a bit of processing and threw it into Unity where I created an audio manager to easily play sounds with a bit of variety from different places in my code. I always love adding sound to my game projects because it's the only part where I'm running mindlessly through my apartment banging on everything I can find to see if it sounds cool. Finally it was time to create the icon. At this point I had pretty much exhausted all my creative resources, but somehow I managed to throw something together. To wrap things up, I created a bunch of builds, uploaded them to the website along with a description and a few screenshots. This is me submitting the game to the site 3 hours after midnight. That was pretty much my experience developing Maniac Inc. I hope you will enjoy playing it. There's a link in the description. Oh, and for the next week or so, you can vote on games on the Ludum Dare website. I really recommend just trying out and voting on a bunch of games. A lot of them are really fun. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in November, and a special thanks to Sultan Al-Sharif, Faisal Marifai, James Calhoun, and Robert Bonham. Become a patron yourself at patreon.com/Brackeys.